So I went up to the lake yesterday and caught some bass.
That's a better one. Ooh, he's running at me. He's coming in the grass. Stay on the grass. Yeah, that's what we're looking for. That is exactly what we're looking for.
And it's cool because it reminded me of a technique that absolutely works this time of year, that late spring, early summer. And it's so versatile and so simple that most oftentimes we forget about it. And it's something you can do with rigs you already have set up. And those are the kind of rigs and techniques I absolutely love because it's using the same thing in a different way. But before we get to all those details, I gotta tell you guys who won the contest, right? So last week, I think it was midweek, I asked you guys to go ahead and drop comments in a video that we did on Ned Rig Fishing to win a little monster bass as well as gambler prize pack. And you guys were awesome. There were tons and tons of comments. So I want to send a shout out to Richard Sharp. He is the winner of our giveaway. Richard, shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or however you like, and get me that Addy, bro, so I can send you your stuff. Thank you guys all for participating, and stay tuned because we're going to do some more giveaways moving forward. I appreciate all the support that you guys give to the channel, so I want to give something back from time to time. So stay tuned for those. But let's talk about me going fishing because that's what this channel is about, right? So I went out to the lake. You know, fish are kind of post-spawn. You know, some are still kind of maybe not pre-spawn, but spawning, staging. But they're pretty much up shallow, 1 to 3, 1 to 6, 1 to 7 feet of water. They're in that sort of like shallow to mid-depth range. And a worm is one of the most viable ways to catch bass from spring all the way through fall. It just catches them, whether it's a ribbon tail worm, a straight tail, like stick style bait, like an ace. It smashes them. So you already have that Texas rig tied up on deck, right? But the one thing that I like doing with it is I'm not big into slowing way down to drag a worm. I want to move a little quicker. And sometimes, especially as the water warms, as the sun's kind of nice and out and there's not much wind chop on the water, it gets tough to catch fish on chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, swim jigs even. You know, your power fishing style techniques, but I still like covering water. So one little technique that I absolutely love, and it's a Florida transplant technique. Like it works in Florida. Part of the reason there is so much grass down there, and that's why it's so viable. But it's what I like to call a swimming worm. And a swimming worm is so cool because you can do it with what you already have set up on deck, and that is a Texas rig, just like this. Just your standard offset, let's see if I can say the word right, O'Shaughnessy hook. You can use a wide gap hook. I prefer this when I'm doing this swimming style plastic technique. And then you use a weight that just accommodates the depth you're trying to hit. This is a 1/4 ounce hog tag, 3/16 if you're going a little bit shallower, 5/16 maybe 3/8 if you're going a little bit deeper. But what's really cool about this technique is you already have this rod rigged up on your deck. You know, you're throwing a stick bait into either clumps or holes in the grass. You're throwing it along rocks and gravel. You're throwing it near docks. So really all you need to do is sort of change up the style of worm that you're using. And I'm going to show you a few little tweaks to this presentation that I actually make to make it a little bit different. They're different rigs than just having your Texas rig up, but they provide a little different action. But let's start with the basics. So if you want to try this out, one of the best worms to do this with, this is a Gambler burner worm. You can do it with a Zoom speed worm, but basically it's a small tailed worm just like this. It has that little standard worm. It's a little smaller. It's almost like a grub tail. It's a little smaller than your ribbon tail style worm. But what's beautiful about this is it's a very slender profile, and what happens is when you swim this thing through the water, it just straight lines through the water. That tail kicks ever so slightly. It looks like a little brim. Maybe if you're using like a white or a shad style one, it looks like a little shad or a whitefish. It's very low disruption. You know, it's not like a chatterbait beating the blade back and forth, spinnerbait with big blades. Even when it comes to, say, like a swim jig that has that skirt on it, it's not as bulky. It's a much more slender profile, and it's just a downsized action. It's more subtle. You have slick water on the top. You don't want to displace as much water. What's really cool about this too is usually in Alabama and up north, I'm throwing it on fluorocarbon. This is 15-pound fluorocarbon. I got it on a 7.2 KS2 This is a medium heavy. I like a medium heavy, pretty standard for most of my applications. 721 SLX Shimano, but just a little bit longer rod so you can make those long casts, and also so that you have a little tip. You know, a lot of times these fish kind of just suck the bait up. They'll just slightly grab it and that rod loads up and you can hit them really nice. But unlike those other baits that really move around and disrupt a lot of water, this has a much more slender profile. And if you put it on braid or even with the fluorocarbon, it's really cool because you can reel it over cover. So say you're on like a little flat that's 2-3 foot deep and you got a couple clumps of pads, maybe you got a little clump of milfoil or a clump of grass. When you're fishing it underwater, you can kind of raise your rod tip and actually reel it, and the tail buzzes on the top, creating kind of like a little bubbling action, and you can go right over that clump of grass or right through that little clump of lily pads. It's a great way to fish in a lot of different sort of areas in the water column very efficiently and very cleanly too, because it's a Texas rig, right? So it's a weedless presentation or a snagless presentation. You can skip this under docks. You can fish it through the grass real easy. You can fish it through trees, stumps, tree falls. And the other cool part is, just as much as you can swim this thing at sort of a steady retrieve, you can stop, let it sink to the bottom. You'll probably see that in a few of these video clips. And if there's a fish behind it, they'll be like, oh, this is my moment. I'm gonna eat it up. So you can do a lot of different things with it. Even if you see like a little target kind of as you're going by and you don't want to swim it through that target, you just want to pitch to it, you can do that because it's a Texas rig. So it works sort of in both facets. The other bait that I really like doing on this, if you're not catching them on a swimming style worm like this with a little tail, sometimes you need to downsize a little more, or sometimes you want something that has a little more of a brim profile. This is a Gambler burner craw, but any little kicker style craw will work. But basically you can see in comparison to the worm, it has a slightly wider body, but it's also more compact in the sense that it's shorter. So it's a shorter bait. It has the 2 kickers on it, but like a Rage Lobster, a Zoom Speed craw, all these baits kind of fit that characterization or that character. You do the exact same thing. You swim this through cover, Texas rig it up, swim it through cover, through grass flats, on grass. If the brim are bedding, if there's fish up around clumps of grass or around clumps of cover, it's a great way to cover water, move efficiently, and it doesn't get snagged. And at the same time, especially with like a burner craw or like a little beaver style bait like this, you can pitch it around, flip it around, drag it if you need to, if you see a little gravel bar or something. It's super versatile, and it's only one thing that I need to have tied up on my deck that I already would have tied up and ready to fish, because the Texas rig is such a viable option late spring all the way through summer. So let me throw a few tweaky ways to do this. So I always like giving you guys some options that are not only general, but then we kind of graduate into more in-depth sort of technical techniques. This specifically is a Strike King structure jig. What's unique about this and what's standard about this is that it's a wobble head basically. You can do this with a football head. The structure jig has a little more pointed nose to it, allowing it to get through cover a little easier. But the big trick is it is a loose sort of floating weight. So basically it's a pre-rigged Texas rig. It's already set up with that offset shank hook to rig a plastic on weedless and use it in cover. Instead of dragging this though, or reeling it slowly on the bottom like a lot of people do, I'll actually fish this above the bottom. I'll reel it just like I would a swimming worm, swimming it through the water column, coming through grass, skipping it under docks, using it almost like you would like a swim jig that you skip docks with. And it's super versatile, and for some reason, that it's just like a jig versus a Texas rig. It seems kind of like the same thing, but the presentation is different to the fish. They react to it differently. Sometimes they want that Texas rig, sometimes they want that wobble head presentation, but it allows the bait to free float on that hook, allowing for some extra sort of wagging back and forth action. Absolutely kills it on Gunnersville and some of the TVA lakes that have grass, and it fishes extremely cleanly, especially if you're fishing like a 1/4 to a 3/8 ounce in anywhere from a foot or two all the way down to 6 to 8 foot. It's a great way to fish some of those expansive mid-depth grass flats that have a lot of strands in that. It's hard to get a reaction bait through. It's hard to get a bait that has hooks on it through, but since it's weedless, you're able to cover water and not get hung up all the time. The other one that I'm playing with, and this is one that's really cool, is an owner flashy swimmer. So I'm not going to show you the bait right away, but so this is an owner flashy swimmer. Basically, it's a belly weighted swim bait hook with a screw lock right there. You can see, now you can see the bait I got on there. There's a small screw lock on there, and then it has a small sort of very subtle like blade on it, very small as well, that just gently sort of spins and displaces water as you're reeling it. You got to fish it pretty slow. This is a 1/4 ounce because I'm fishing it pretty shallow. One thing I'll tell you about this though is you always want to use a little bit heavier weight than you think you need, because just like a jig, this guy will ride up a bit between the blade as well as the bigger plastic that you put on it. But one thing that I've been doing is, this is the new Gambler Slim Easy. It's basically like a boot tail swim bait with a very small subtle tail on it, but it has the body of a swimming style worm. So what I can do with this is treat it just like the burner worm or a speed worm or something along those lines, but I'm getting a little different sort of wagging action instead of that kicking tail worm action that I'm getting out of a swimming style worm. So it's a different look. It's a little bit bigger. This is a 6-inch, but it has a little bit wider body on it. But what I'm doing is I'm rigging that up on the flashy swimmer. I think it's a 3/0 or a 4/0 hook, not very big, because when they get this thing, they get it, boy, let me tell you. But what it does is it provides a little different look, and we have been experiencing, I don't know about you guys, but we get some rain down here, especially in North Alabama. It stains the water a little. The swimming worm, you'll be amazed, you get bit in pretty dirty water on it, but it is reliant on a visual cue. You know, the fish do feel the water displacement from that little tail, but overall it's a visual presentation. They gotta see it. So sometimes when that water gets a little dirty up shallow, not super, super dirty, but it gets a little stained, maybe there's a little chop on the water, and I want the bait to have just a little more water displacement, maybe a little more sound and a little more flash to call those fish in. I'll get out that flashy swimmer, and you can do this with a swimming style worm as well, but it allows me to get a little bit of flash, a little bit more water displacement, and then putting a swim bait it needs to be like a solid body. I prefer like a solid style plastic. This is a solid all the way through. There's no hollowness to it. But this Slim Easy, it's slender, it's streamlined, and has a little slightly different but small kicker tail. I don't like overpowering it. If you're doing this technique, it means they're really not biting like your bigger sort of more active power fishing techniques. So I want to be somewhat subtle, but I also need the fish to be able to pick up on the bait. But that's kind of a little sneaky rig that I like to do. And you'd be amazed, even with that blade on there, it comes super clean through a lot of grass. Super, super thick stuff. Yeah, she's gonna hang a little bit, but it gives you a little bit of grass connection. And what's cool is this is sort of like a moving arm. So it's just like trap fishing. You'll get that arm a little caught on the grass, and you can give it a little pop, and that little pop will cause the fish to react and go out and snatch it. So these are 3 really cool rigs, all related to swimming a soft plastic that you can do from sort of late spring all the way through summer. Super viable for shallow water fishing down to your mid depths, especially if you're fishing on grass or other types of cover where it's just difficult and problematic to get a bait that has treble hooks or an extended or open hook on through. And it's also great too when they're just not biting those hard style baits. Swim jigs, chatterbaits, spinner baits, big crankbaits, things along those lines. It allows you to present a soft plastic, which you know they're biting, which is a perfect option when they're not biting too well, to those fish, but at the same time you're being efficient and covering water, moving, but you're doing it in a subtle way, and you're gonna get bites. It's a great way to get a million bites, and that's what I have a lot of fun with. It tells me a lot about how the fish are set up, what they're doing, and how to catch them. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It all comes from a day out fishing where I had a blast catching a bunch of fish on this swimming style worm or this swimming style plastic technique. Super viable anywhere in the United States from Florida to up north, especially if you have grass and cover on some of these shallower flats. But I always miss stuff. And you guys are just as smart, if not smarter than me about fishing. So if you guys got anything to add to this technique, go down in the comments box, drop me a note, and then I'll put a link to a cool video right at the end here, and go check it out. It's a little addition to maybe your spring and summer techniques. Look for it in the video credits. Tight lines, hit that like and subscribe button. Later, guys.